start on electoral reform because...
and be reasonably brief.
I will be reasonably brief.
Given that I know you want to get
I'm
back to
actually
that.
a little bit odd because I'm a Conservative who's not completely opposed to it. I think there's a lot of room for electoral reform within various political institutions. I believe, for example, that we ought to have electoral reform at council level. I think we've shown on Norwich City Council how necessarily being hung council can't be a bad thing. I think that it's good in terms of what's happened in Europe, particularly the pan-European groupings which have been formed out of PR in different countries. I do, however, draw the line on Westminster elections because I believe that first past the post does give you stability, and in the current situation where we've got the markets in the way they are, I think we do need strong single-party government in order to be able to give them stability in what they do. The other reason why I'm against it is because large numbers of systems of voting reform remove powers actually from most people in terms of removing their MP. At the moment, you've got a great opportunity. If you don't like this man, you can go and vote him out on May the 6th. And you know exactly who is accountable to you. There he is. You can have a go at him. You know where he is. You know where to get hold of him, and you can vote against him. That wasn't meant for a round of applause, though.
If you really want to.
If you really want to. However, if we were under any one of the systems which comes with lists, you would not be able to do that. Because if Mr. Clark ended up at the top of a list, you would not be able to remove him without necessarily voting against your party or other people further down the list. And what that does is fundamentally hand power to the cabal of members who run political parties rather than individual voters. So if you're going to do it, I actually think very carefully about the system in which you're going to switch to. On MPs' expenses, I actually think that MPs have had a rough time for perhaps 20 years. I think actually the majority of MPs are decent, hard-working people who want to do the best for their communities. I think there have been a minority, some of which have been absolute lawbreakers and deserve everything that they get in the courts of law, and it's why I, last September, issued an honesty pledge to suggest how I would act if lucky enough to be elected as your Member of Parliament, so you can see things in advance. Conservatives have said we'll introduce recall powers to make sure you can sack MPs who have acted corruptly halfway through a term of office. We're going to reduce the number of MPs by 10% and cut ministerial salary by 5%.
Thank you. I completely accept and indeed am enthusiastic about the need for wide political reform in our electoral system. I want to see a system of proportional representation, so the number of people elected for a particular party is broadly in line with what people want. I think it's absurd that in this country we have a system where a minority of votes hands parties huge majorities in the Commons. There's also this speculation at the moment that Labour, who are currently third in some of the opinion polls, might actually come out with the highest number of seats. I mean, that is surely a crazy situation for a democracy as established as ours to be in. So I would like to see proportional representation. I agree with Anthony over the downsides of party lists, where you simply vote for a political party rather than individual candidates. I think that hands far too much power into the hands of party apparatchiks, and I would be opposed to that form of proportional representation. But there are other systems that work and work very well and work in many other countries. By introducing proportional representation, you'd also abolish this concept of safe seats that we have in this country, where a candidate, usually it has to be said, of either Labour or Conservative in particular constituencies, can be guaranteed massive majorities, irrespective of irrespective of who they actually are and what their track record has been. And it's quite notable that in the MPs' abuses that we've had over the last year or two with expenses, that some of the worst offenders have been MPs in safe seats, where there's been no real chance of the electorate booting them out because their party vote has been so very strong. So let's have proportional representation so that votes count. Let's end the practice of safe seats. Let's move to having an elected House of Lords as well. Let's not forget them. And we need to improve accountability of MPs between elections as well by introducing the right for constituents to sack their MP. By having a vote, if an MP's done something wrong, let's not wait until the next election to come around. Let's have a right to kick them out now. It would happen in any other job. Why not in politics? I think that that sort of addresses part of the third question as well, which is that I feel that Parliament must reflect the views of the people, and we can achieve that more effectively by changing the voting system. But look, in terms of the general conduct of politicians, I think that we need to now, once we've had these scandals, we now need to move to looking towards politicians who are going to be straight talking, who are going to be honest with people about how they conduct themselves, about what they can do and what they can't do as well. I mean, so many politicians will promise the earth to get the vote, and I think we need to move away from that, because as a result, we've got a very cynical electorate, and rightly so. I think politicians need to do more to engage with people directly. I think, again, if we move away from safe seats, actually, we would see more engagement with people on the ground across the country. You're very fortunate here if you're an elector in Norwich South, and that this is going to be a very hard-fought contest. But that's not the case in many constituencies in the country, and some people might not even be aware that there's an election on, because there's so little activity on the ground in some parts of the country. The question of student loans, it's an absolute disgrace, the delays that many students have had to face in order to get their loans. It's appalling. I believe that the student loans company are actually looking at making further staff cutbacks, which I fail to see how that can improve the situation. But I think that the management of this company needs to be held to account when things go wrong. And I think that that's what's failed so far. There's not been that accountability, and that's what needs to be addressed, because we cannot have a system that students are absolutely reliant on to get through, to get the finances they need, if it then falls apart as badly as it has done.